Welcome back, Deep Divers. Today we're going to be looking at something a little different. Hansel and Gretel, witch hunters. You know that movie that decided to take a classic fairy tale and, well, turn it up to 11?
Yeah, it's definitely a unique take. What really grabbed my attention was how it flips the whole story on its head. We're not dealing with those innocent kids lost in the woods anymore. It's Hansel and Gretel, all grown up, hardened, and they're taking on the witch hunting world.
And the world they're in, it's incredible visually, especially how it kind of blends gothic elements with almost a steampunk aesthetic.
Right, you get those classic gothic vibes. Architecture, the forests, all dark and shadowy. It's like stepping into a classic horror movie. But then you see Hansel and Gretel. They're wielding these crazy steampunk weapons.
The juxtaposition is so interesting. It's almost like the steampunk elements. They represent how Hansel and Gretel have changed. Like visually, we're seeing that shift from innocents to hardened hunters.
You know, you're right. That visual clash, it isn't just there to look cool. It really feeds into the whole tone of the movie. Action, horror, and even some dark humor thrown in, almost like a modern B-movie, you know?
Yeah, totally. And the action sequences in this setting. Oh, man. There's that one scene where they're fighting a whole coven of witches in this abandoned cathedral.
Oh, yeah, I know.
The camera just, dances through this crumbling architecture while they're dodging spells and firing those crossbows. Pure visual poetry.
They definitely knew how to use the setting and those steampunk weapons to their advantage. The action is completely over the top. So stylish, lots of slow-mo shots. And then they somehow managed to work in some dark humor, even into the fight choreography.
They never let it get too serious, which made it so much fun to watch. And speaking of over the top, Famke Janssen as Muriel, the Grand Witch. She is chewing the scenery in the best way possible.
Oh, she's fantastic. She just goes all in on that campy villain role.
Yeah.
And it works so well. It adds to the whole, the absurdity of the film. It's the perfect contrast to, the more serious performances from Renner and Gemma Arterton.
Now, Renner, we usually see him in those intense, dramatic roles.
Yeah.
Like The Hurt Locker or Arrival. Did you find his portrayal of Hansel surprising at all?
I think he brings this world weariness to the character. Like Hansel has seen some things, but there's also this hint of dry humor there. Like he knows how ridiculous it all is. It's a good balance between seriousness and self-awareness.
And Arterton. She's no stranger to action either. I mean, she was awesome in Clash of the Titans and The King's Man.
Yeah.
Here, she's just fierce as Gretel. No damsel in distress here.
Not at all. She's right there with Hansel, every step of the way. Just as skilled, just as deadly. It's refreshing to see a female character in this kind of movie, who's not just there as a love interest or a sidekick. She's a true equal. Now,
the film does touch on the impact of their childhood trauma.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really dive too deep into it.
Yeah.
Do you think that was a missed opportunity? Like, could exploring those themes have added another layer to the whole film?
Oh, definitely. There was so much potential there to really dig into those darker aspects of their past, the scars, It could have given the characters even more depth and maybe even offered some commentary on the long-term effects of trauma.
It's like they planted the seed but didn't quite give enough water to grow. Still, I appreciate that they at least tried to weave those themes in. Even if it was subtle, it adds this complexity to their motivations and makes that journey as witch hunters even more compelling.
It does add another dimension to them. And even though the focus is on action and visuals, the film does offer some subtle commentary on how society views witches.
I was thinking about that too. The witches in this film, they're not just cackling villains. They're presented as a diverse group. They have their own motivations, their own complexities.
You see some driven by revenge, others by power. Some are just trying to protect themselves. It really challenges that classic fairy tale trope of the evil witch. It makes you think about different perspectives.
There's that scene when Hansel and Gretel stumble upon a group of witches.
Yeah.
And they realize that not all of them are on Muriel's side. That was a real turning point for me. It made me think about prejudice and how dangerous it is to make assumptions.
Exactly. Things aren't always black and white. And that's something the film manages to get across, even with all the over-the-top stuff going on.
It's interesting how they blend those deeper themes with this, B-movie sensibility. You have social commentary, and then, bam, explosions, chases, witches being blown up.
Yeah, it's a strange mix. And I know it's not for everyone, but I think that's part of why it's got such a cult following. It embraces the absurd, doesn't take itself too seriously.
It's like a guilty pleasure. A movie you can enjoy on different levels. You can have fun with the visuals, the action, the humor, but you can also pick up on the social commentary and how it flips those classic fairy tale tropes.
It's a movie that can spark conversations.
Which is always a good thing.
Yeah.
And speaking of conversations, the film has gotten some pretty mixed reviews.
It has.
Some people love the visuals and how entertaining it is. Others criticize the lack of depth and the cliches.
Yeah.
I can see both sides. It's not a perfect movie.
Right.
The dialogue can be a little clunky. And the plot does rely on some familiar tropes. But I think those flaws are part of what makes it so charming. It's not trying to be some highbrow art film. It just wants to entertain.
And sometimes that's all you need.
Except,
a fun, escapist experience.
I have to admit, I was grinning through most of this movie. It's just so ridiculous. And yet there's a charm to it, like watching a live-action cartoon.
I think that's a great way to put it. It has that energy, that visual flair. The story might not be breaking new ground, but the way they executed it, especially the visual effects and the action, really impressive.
The filmmakers had a vision.
They did.
And they went for it. And I think you can see that passion, even in the parts that aren't so great.
It's that sense of fun and dedication that makes the film work. You can tell everyone involved is having a blast, bringing this twisted fairy tale to life.
It's infectious. You just get swept up in it.
Now, for our listeners who enjoyed this blend of action, horror, and dark humor, there are a few other films I think you might like.
I'm all ears.
If you're looking for another movie that takes fairy tales and gives them a modern twist, I'd recommend Snow White and the Huntsman. Visually stunning, strong female lead, some really great action sequences.
Ooh, good choice. Kristen Stewart is fantastic in that one.
She is. She brings so much to the role of Snow White. It's more than just the damsel in distress.
And Chris Hemsworth is the huntsman. He's great, too.
He is.
And for viewers who really like the Gothic aesthetic and that blend of fantasy and horror, maybe Van Helsing.
Oh, yeah.
A bit of a guilty pleasure, but it's fun. Action-packed, and some pretty memorable creature designs.
Hugh Jackman is always entertaining.
Yeah.
And the over-the-top action, the monster mayhem, perfect for fans of the genre.
It's like they took Hansel and Gretel, threw in some Dracula. Classic monsters meet modern action heroes. Thrilling and campy.
Exactly. It embraces those B-movie roots.
And sometimes that's what you need.
For a fun movie night?
Now, one thing that stuck out to me about Hansel and Gretel was the pacing. It feels like the movie's always moving, jumping from one action sequence to the next.
It does.
Did you think the pacing worked? Or did it feel rushed at times?
Depends on what you like.
I guess so.
Some people love that fast-paced, high-energy style. Others might find it overwhelming, maybe even a little disorienting.
Yeah, I could see that. I like the energy. But I could understand wanting a little more breathing room.
It's like a roller coaster.
Oh, yeah.
You're strapped in. It's a wild ride. And you just have to hold on.
Love that analogy.
Like a roller coaster. It's over pretty quickly.
Yeah, it is a pretty short movie.
Under an hour and a half.
Which is short for an action movie these days.
Definitely.
It's lean, mean, a witch hunting machine. No wasted time, no unnecessary subplots.
Straight to the point.
All killer, no filler.
It's laser focused, doesn't stray from its path. Revenge and redemption, told with style and a lot of dark humor.
And that simplicity works.
It does.
It's a movie you can just switch your brain off for.
Sit back, relax, enjoy.
Now, the setting. It's almost like its own character. The dark forests, those crumbling castles, the Gothic villages.
Right.
It creates this otherworldly feeling.
The production design is amazing. They built a world that feels familiar, but also completely fantastical.
Like where fairy tales and nightmares meet.
Exactly.
It's like stepping into a Brothers Grimm storybook.
But with a modern action twist.
That blend of old and new.
It makes the visuals so striking.
It's a feast for the eyes. Costumes, sets, special effects.
It all comes together, creates this immersive experience. And that attention to detail, that commitment to creating a world that's both beautiful and terrifying, that's what elevates it.
It's not just mindless action, there's artistry there.
Absolutely. They took the time to craft something special.
A world you want to explore, even if it means running into some scary witches.
And speaking of scary witches, Famke Janssen as Muriel, she is unforgettable.
Oh, for sure.
She brings this gravitas, this menace, but she also embraces that over-the-top villainy.
Your costume design was perfect. Elegant, but intimidating. Those flowing robes, that headdress.
It showed both sides of her power and her cruelty.
A force to be reckoned with.
Definitely.
Both visually.
Yeah.
And in terms of her performance.
And it's a perfect example of how the film balances those darker elements with that tongue-in-cheek humor.
Muriel is a genuine threat. But she also has fun with it.
Yeah, and that keeps the film from becoming too dark.
It's a tough balance.
It is.
But they pull it off.
They did.
Now, one of the criticisms is that it relies on cliches. Did you think it fell into any of those traps? Or did it manage to subvert them?
There are definitely some familiar tropes there. The damsel in distress, for example.
Interesting. We talked about how Gretel's a strong character, but there are times when she does need Hansel to rescue her. So what do you think?
I think those moments, even though they might seem like a step back, they actually highlight the bond between Hansel and Gretel. Hansel is so protective of his sister, he'll do anything to keep her safe.
So it's not that she's helpless. It's more about his devotion to her.
Exactly. And that bond is what drives them to defeat Muriel.
It's their shared trauma, their past, that gives them the strength to overcome everything.
It's a theme that runs through the whole film. The idea that our past experiences, no matter how painful, shape who we are and give us the resilience to face our fears.
It's a powerful message.
It is.
One that makes the film more than just a genre flick.
It reminds us that even in the darkest fairy tales, there's hope for redemption, for healing, for finding our way back to the light.
And sometimes, the best way to face our demons is head on, with a crossbow and some dark humor.
The Hansel and Gretel way.
Now, before we wrap up, there was something about the visuals that really struck me. The birds.
Oh, yeah.
There was this recurring motif of birds throughout the film.
I noticed that too.
You see them flying, perched on rooftops, even worked into the witches' designs. Do you think there's a deeper meaning there? What do birds symbolize in this context?
That's a good question.
It is.
Birds are often associated with freedom, flight, transcendence in this film. Maybe they represent Hansel and Gretel's desire to escape their past.
To rise above the darkness.
Exactly.
Like a visual reminder that even in the dark, there's hope for liberation.
And that hope is what drives them.
It's a beautiful touch. Adds another layer to the visual storytelling.
Those little details, the symbols, that's what makes a movie more than just an action flick.
It makes you think.
It does.
Like the filmmakers are inviting us to look deeper.
To engage with the story on a different level.
It's what separates a good film from a great one.
For sure.
It makes you think and feel long after it's over.
And Hansel and Gretel definitely does that.
Now, for our listeners who are intrigued by this movie, what other films would you recommend?
If you want another fairy tale with a modern action twist, I'd recommend Maleficent. It's a reimagining of Sleeping Beauty, but from the villain's perspective.
Oh, I love that one.
Angelina Jolie is mesmerizing as Maleficent, and the film explores redemption and the complexities of good and evil.
It really challenges how we think about heroes and villains.
Exactly. Things aren't always what they seem.
And even the most wicked creatures can have a heart.
For sure.
And for those who love that gothic atmosphere, I'd recommend Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's visually stunning. Blends horror, fantasy, and mystery.
Tim Burton is a master at creating those visually arresting worlds.
He is.
And Sleepy Hollow is no exception.
That gothic setting, the soundtrack, Johnny Depp as Ichabod Crane.
It all comes together to create this unforgettable atmosphere.
It's a film that stays with you.
It does.
And for those who enjoyed the blend of action and comedy, how about Abraham Lincoln? Vampire Hunter.
Now there's a premise.
I know, right?
It's a wild movie, embraces how absurd it is. Fun, action-packed, some surprisingly good fight scenes.
It's a great example of how to blend history and fantasy.
It is.
To create something unique and entertaining.
So there you have it. Fairy tales, gothic horror, historical action comedy. There's something for everyone.
Hopefully our deep dive into Hansel and Gretel has given you some ideas for your next movie night.
Now, before we go, let's leave our listeners with something to think about.
I love doing that.
We've talked a lot about how Hansel and Gretel twists fairy tales, but what if we took it a step further?
Okay, I'm listening.
What if instead of just reimagining the story, we explored the psychology behind those tropes?
I like where you're going with this.
Instead of focusing on the action, we delve into those darker aspects.
The trauma, the fear.
The allure of forbidden knowledge, the consequences of revenge.
It'd be a very different kind of fairy tale.
It would.
More psychological, introspective.
A fairy tale for adults.
Wow.
A story that explores our darkest fears.
It'd be fascinating.
It would.
But also disturbing.
A journey into the heart of darkness.
And a journey we're all capable of taking.
If we're willing to face our fears.
So, to our listeners, I challenge you. What dark fairy tale would you like to see reimagined this way?
And what truths might those stories reveal? about ourselves and the world we live in? Yeah, it's a question worth asking.
It really is.
It makes you think about, the power of fairy tales to explore those deeper, darker themes.
They're not just for kids.
Definitely not.
They reflect our hopes and fears, our dreams, our nightmares.
And by looking at them through a psychological lens, we can gain a whole new understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
It's like we're holding up a mirror to our collective psyche and seeing what's staring back.
And what we see, it might not be pretty, might even be terrifying.
But it's through those confrontations
with our shadows
that we can grow, evolve.
It's the hero's journey, right?
Exactly.
We face our demons and we come out changed.
And that transformation,
that process of self-discovery.
That's what makes fairy tales so powerful.
They remind us that even in the darkest times,
there's hope.
Hope for redemption, for healing, for finding the light again.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Hansel and Gretel, witch hunters, I want to thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
Exploring this twisted world.
And those thought-provoking themes.
And to our listeners, keep those themes in mind as you watch the film. Don't just focus on the action.
Look deeper.
Look for the symbolism, the questions the film raises about good and evil, justice and revenge.
And remember, even in the darkest fairy tales, there's always a glimmer of hope.
That's a great note to end on. So, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those fairy tale embers burning.
They should burn bright.
If you like this video, be sure to give us a like down below.
Yeah, it really helps us out.
And subscribe to the channel for more deep dives. We've got some great stuff coming up.
We do.
Until next time.
Happy watching.